This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia. Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about why move to Russia. First item of business, low cost of living. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yes. So low cost of living is probably one of the most attractive factors about living in Russia. Fun fact that actually just 10, 15 years ago, Russia was literally the most expensive country in the world for expats. Well, I guess we should say Moscow. I'm sure the villages were not that expensive, but cost of living today in Russia due to the current economic situation is very low, especially when compared to Europe, the United States, Australia, Canada. It's very, very low. So that's a huge plus for most people. If you've got your own business, it's an even bigger plus. Or if you have a remote job and you're making dollars or euros, I mean, you can live very, very well for $4,000 or $5,000 a month, even in Moscow. I mean, you can get a great apartment in the center and have a great style of life in Russia. So those are kind of my thoughts. I think it's a no-brainer if you've got international income. If you don't, it can be tough because salaries are not very high. You can watch a number of other videos about cost of living in Russia. But generally, if you've got money and not even a lot of it, it will go a long way if it's a different currency than the ruble.
Right. I would just add that just some examples, like in the US, you might spend $40 to $50 for a cell phone. Your cell phone bill. In Russia, it's $8 to $10.
Oh, you've been out of the US too long.
You've
been out of the US too long. It's 60 to 100 per person per month.
What do you pay?
So we have Verizon, which is the best, and it's about 120 for my wife and I.
Wow, okay, because when I was there in August, I would just pick up the SIM card for the month.
Well, of course you can do that.
And I'd get the cheaper one.
Of course you can do that.
I think it was about 40 to 50 a month if you get the good package. So
right,
but
I will say,
okay, so
if
it can
you have to rely on
more.
that, it's not that good. But what I was going to say is that's not that reliable.
Okay.
If you go with one of the major operators, it's much more reliable. I just had bad experiences with that.
Okay, so you're $60 versus Russia's $10 a month. Yeah.
And that's an expensive package in Russia.
Yeah. What else? Like taxi, getting a taxi to the airport is, I don't know, $12 bucks, 15 or less to go like 30 to 40 kilometers in Moscow.
Kilometers, yeah.
Yeah, so
same price here, it's like 40 or 50 bucks.
All services are complete. Internet at home, again, is 500 rubles, or
right.
What's that, $8?
No, I mean, everything's cheaper. Rent, maybe not if you're from, a low cost of living city in the US like Houston. Renting a similar apartment is probably cheaper in Houston, but everything else is.
But it'd still be comparable now because of the ruble. So
no. I'm saying, like, if you have a nice apartment in Houston, it's going to run you, an apartment, right? We're not comparing a house in the US to an apartment in Russia. We're comparing equal size apartments. I mean, if you compare it to New York, San Francisco, Boston, DC, the big major cities, or London, or the bigger cities in Europe, it's much cheaper.
Much cheaper, yeah. The next thing on the list was travel.
Lots of travel opportunities in Russia. I think that's the best part. Russia is the biggest country in the world, and you have a little bit of everything. In the far north, you have, winter wonderlands, let's call them. The white nights in St. Petersburg in the summer, and complete darkness in the winter. But if you go further north, there's lots of amazing nature, especially in the winter, between St. Petersburg and Murmansk. And then you've got all kinds of great places to go in the winter. But then you also have Sochi, warm weather. What was your favorite place in Russia other than Moscow or St. Petersburg?
If we're talking about domestic travel, I really enjoyed driving, actually taking road trips from Moscow to St. Petersburg, because my wife is from St. Petersburg. So one of my favorite trips was the trip between those two cities, because they opened up the toll road, so you could get to between those two cities by car within 6 hours. It used to be 9-10 hours. So I drove to smaller cities like Pskov or Voronezh, and then you would stop on the side of the road and buy fresh fish, smoked fish, or berries, or honey, or all these weird, weird Russian, like what's a badger oil or something like that. So
I don't know.
Yeah, they have this thing where if kids get sick, they put badger fat on their chest, kind of like a rub. You never heard of that?
Never.
You never had kids in Russia, but yeah, we would buy those types of things on the road. So travel as far as domestic, and then they have low cost airlines now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They didn't have. I don't know, when did Pobeda start, for example?
But even before they had low-cost airlines, it was still relatively cheap to fly almost anywhere between Europe, Asia, and Middle East and Africa.
Right, but what?
Just by nature of where Moscow is located, right?
Right. So within 3 hours, you can be, 3.5 hours. You're in Turkey, you're in Germany, you're in an hour and 20 minutes to Helsinki. So when we're talking about domestic and international travel, you have so many more options.
Right. And I think the next positive is the most important for me, and why someone should move to Russia is the people. All of the best experiences I ever had in Russia had something to do with the people. Some of the worst experiences also had to do with the people, but in general, like what I remember being the best part about Russia was just the hospitality of people, the friendliness of the people, just being they're always endearing to people who are trying to learn Russian, which I think is not the case in many countries in Europe especially. It was just fantastic. They always love to share their traditions and their culture, things like the banya. It's just unforgettable, honestly. I mean, that's what made Russia for me. I remember the first time we went to this little town called Syktyvkar for 5 days, and we lived like in tiny Russian apartments, and they took us around. We did all of the kind of, let's call them stereotypical, Russian culture things like the banya, or going to a nightclub, or going to, like the cultural events, theater in this little tiny town. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I will never forget those types of experiences in Russia.
Yeah, I have a lot of very good friends. One thing about Russians that I really respect is that you can have a very heated argument with a Russian, and then, the next day you're nothing, you don't have any bad feelings or anything, so
right.
It's different in other cultures. It seems like expats and locals kind of are divided, but in Russia I wouldn't say. Obviously, there's a language barrier, but that's the only barrier
divided
to
if you want to be divided. Yeah.
So
yeah, I think you're right. I mean,
what I was going to say is the language barrier is the only barrier in between Russians and expats, and you really don't even have to speak very good Russian to experience how hospitable Russians are. I mean,
absolutely. And the last pro is safety. I think, of course, there's lots of safe areas in major Western European and American cities. The problem is that there are no bad neighborhoods in Russia. Like, there are no places you shouldn't go. There may be some places in Moscow you shouldn't go just because, there's lots of other stuff going on, and, there's nothing for tourists there. But I never encountered one issue with safety in Russia in my 5 years there. But I know, Marcus, you have a slightly different experience, but you still agree with me that safety is a big positive of.
So I'm from a very, very small town in the US, right? I never spent any significant amount of time in LA or New York or any Chicago or something like that. So I don't have experience to compare to those cities. But if you ask a Russian, there are definitely places that they wouldn't spend their time, especially at night. But my own experience says otherwise. I don't drink, or I don't do anything like that. So I had a few expat friends who got into some trouble because of that. But
well, I was just going to say, I think the only real safety issue in Moscow is probably actually right in the city center, where the bars are concentrated, and when people are leaving the bars and, you know, just getting into scuffles. I mean, there's not places in Moscow where you're just going to be hassled walking around late at night outside the center. At least that was my experience.
My experience, I had a few encounters that you know, were unpleasant, but I never felt like, you know, they were life-threatening. And when it comes to, you know, some crime in Russia, it seems to always be, you know, money. It's not like a serious crime, like a severe crime, just because, like, inexplicable. It's always, give me your wallet, you know, and that's it. But I have never been stuck up in Russia. I've never been pickpocketed. I was usually, you know, aware of my surroundings all the time, and I would walk around, you know, at midnight from the subway. I never felt threatened, but I wouldn't say that you know, people I know who lived in New York or LA or other big cities around the world, they've told me multiple times that they would never go out after a certain time in that city.
Right.
So that's definitely something, you know, I'd walk around late at night coming from, you know, the center, maybe a theater or late from a movie or something, and I never felt like I was in danger.
Right. So those are our reasons why we think people should consider moving to Russia if you're considering it. There's lots to love about the country. There's, you know, it's a huge country, lots of opportunities, you know, lots of different people. Our experience was overwhelmingly positive. But if you have other ideas why you think people should move to Russia, let us know in the comments below.
See you in the next video.